Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
Today, Ben Taylor joins me to talk about the ins and outs of narcissistic abuse. Ben Taylor is a self-aware narcissist, and he has been on his healing journey for a really long time. He is a wealth of knowledge and has an amazing way to break down some of the complexities of narcissistic abuse in a way that we can actually really understand it and also see how deeply not personal it is when we're affected by it. He has a lot of resources, all of which will be in the show notes. So if you are listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I have to find more out about this guy, just scroll down. Everything will be there. He works daily with narcissistic abuse survivors to find healing and be free from trauma. And he also interacts with narcissists to try and help them wake up and change. Hi, Ben. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be here.
Can you tell us who you are and the work that you do?
Yeah. So my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist that produces videos, content, and coaches people trying to build awareness about narcissism and then help people in their growth, healing, change, and development moving forward from the abuse that they've either suffered or been a part of or seen, anything like that. So I have a platform, social media presence, and also interactions, websites, things like that for people to be able to help in their healing and in their process moving forward.
How did you figure out that you were a narcissist, or how did you start to get the awareness that you may have NPD?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So a lot of times you hear from everybody out there, like narcissists either aren't self-aware or they have no like willingness to be self-aware. And that was definitely the case for me because I didn't think there was anything wrong. You know, there wasn't anything in my life that I wanted to acknowledge or realize that I was doing anything wrong because I wanted to justify it in my mind that I was the good person, that I was the good guy. And so growing up, there's pieces that I always knew I was different than everybody else. I connected with people different. I interacted with people different. I didn't have the same type of emotions or empathy or care for other people. And so I knew there was something different there. I wasn't sure what. In growing up and getting into the dating game and all this kind of stuff, I got to the place where I was never alone after that point. It was like I was always with someone. And so as a relationship would be disintegrating, one would be starting already or slightly before. And so there was always this kind of like churn of like always being with someone, or always having that, what we'd call now is like supply, that like attention from another person. And so going into college, it ended up being the same kind of style. Getting out of college, same kind of style. Ended up getting with my wife and we got married and moved forward with that. And the cycle didn't stop. You know, it was still stuff that was still me wanting to reach out to other people, interact. And that's when I started into my affairs about a year into our marriage. Mm-hmm. And so went through a period of multiple affairs, multiple things that happened in our marriage, total of 5 different affairs in about 8 years. And with those that happened, there's like a couple things like all kind of like intermingled and mixed in. So first off, part of it kind of came from like the work side. Is I started getting involved in working with more and more teams, having to build teams, work with teams, all that kind of stuff, which doesn't really fit well when I want to do everything my way, right? So I started having to learn about teams and started learning about like the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, Enneagram, all these different like personality tests and things like that to figure out how do we build teams, how do we bring them together, and started realizing that my scores are like really different. And again, just like kind of like another thing of like, okay, something's different here. I got introduced to a couple of different books, one of them like on emotional intelligence. I was reading a lot for like work. And so started reading about some other things like that. Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, that started introducing the concept of shame. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know that that was something that I dealt with or that was, I was processing. It was always like hidden kind of underneath the surface. So that kind of pulled something out of that. It wasn't until I read the book like the 3rd or 4th time that I even like realized that there was like a section about narcissism. Just never registered. Like when I finally read it after being aware, I was like, oh, that's here. So there's like a little bit nuance of finding these little snippets, little like pieces. I got to the place where timeline, it's like all kind of discombobulated. I got to the place one time where I was talking to my wife and I was like, I just don't really care about other people. I don't connect. I don't have the same kind of emotions. And I don't have empathy, anything like that. I was like, maybe I'm like a sociopath. It was like one of those moments I was like, I don't know, like what's wrong with me kind of thing. And so we looked it up and she was like, I don't think you're a sociopath. I think you're a narcissist. And then I looked it up and I was like, no, definitely not a narcissist. Like, forget that. And made sure to make her feel crazy that she called me that, and to tell all of my friends and her friends that she called me that, so they would go back and tell her that I wasn't a narcissist, all this different kind of stuff. And so, like, got to the place that I got with a girl who had one of the affair partners that had BPD with narcissistic traits, and started to see some of the same stuff that she was doing be like reflected back at me, but it wasn't a reflection of my actions. It was stuff that she was doing. And I started to realize, like, wait a second, like, that's what I do, or like, that's how I interact. And she's interacting this way. And that ended really awful and really bad. And part of that started bringing like a little bit to light of like, okay, maybe there's something there, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to admit it. I got sent to a sexual addiction intensive, and that was like a several days, like all day kind of thing. And when I left that, there was a piece of me that's like, I know I don't struggle with being a sex addict. Was sex part of, the affairs and everything? Yes, obviously. But I know that I'm not a sex addict. I know it's actually narcissism, and the outworking of that is the affairs and all this kind of stuff. So there's a piece of it that was a little bit of like a relief and also like a frustration at the same time. Like having to admit to myself, before I admit it to anybody else, but having to admit to myself that, okay, that's actually what this is. But there was also this piece of like, okay, I can put a label on it now. Now I can actually work on it or look at it or figure it out or whatever it might be. And so then I got into a group shortly after that breakup and the intensive and everything like that, called Wake Up Warrior. And in working with Wake Up Warrior, I started realizing that the main premise there was to stop lying. And I had all these lies in my life about everything. And lies that I knew I had was like the affairs or like things like that, like to other people, to my work, to my wife, different things like that. But I didn't realize I had lies to myself or lies to God. And so there's a big piece of going through that Wake Up Warrior 30-day challenge that I started realizing and started to see the lies that I had in my life on a day-to-day basis, like, needed to be eradicated. And so I started going through a process of getting rid of the lies. And it was a frustrating and a painful process to get rid of them, because I didn't just come out and tell them all. It was one of those things, I tell one and then I tell another one, I'd slowly. So it was very painful for my wife, especially going through that process. I ended up finally getting to the place where I was like, okay, I'll like try out therapy. I don't really like it, but I'll try it out. So I went to EMDR therapy and spent 6 months doing EMDR therapy, which helped like clear some like past trauma, some past thoughts that I had, emotional trauma that I didn't know was trauma. I kind of walked in being like, I don't have any trauma. So like, what's the point of this? And then stuff came out that I was like, I didn't even realize that was there. And so then after that, then I started to go to regular talk therapy. It took me a while to find the right one, in one sense, that would understand me as far as like the narcissism piece, and also be willing to call me out versus just like, oh, it's okay, that kind of a thing. And so started into therapy, was in therapy with that person for first couple months. And then that's when my wife left, because in all of this slow realization, there still wasn't changed behavior. There still wasn't a difference or an application of it actually applying and being different at that point. She was gone for a little bit over like a quarter of a year, came back to get some of her stuff. And at that point, there was some difference. There was some changes. And she was like, well, I'll try it out. I'll be here for a week or a month and see how he actually is, kind of a thing. And then she ended up staying, not because I was manipulating at that point, but because I was just being real and saying, this is who I am. This is what's going on. And we started interacting more, communicating more, started to like talk through and work through things. She'd been in therapy for twice as long as I had at that point, and been in therapy ever since. And so it was probably like 6 months or so after she came back that we got into therapy together as a couple. And so we work with the same kind of like organization. And so she sees one therapist, I see a different therapist, and we both see a different therapist between that.
Yeah.
And then we all have NDAs so they can all talk to each other to try to help with transparency and all of that. And so, yeah, that kind of brings us up to the present as far as our whole story. There's a lot of other nuances and pieces, but hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of perspective.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing all of that with me and with us. I think that I read a little bit about your story, and I know that I figured at one point your wife probably left. I didn't kind of see that when I was reading about you, but I thought it was amazing that you two were able to get to a point where you could communicate and work through things together. And I know how hard that is, but also like how much work that took probably out of both of you to be able to get to that point.
Yeah, no, very much so. So it's definitely been a process and a journey, but it's been really incredible to be where we are today versus like where we were a year ago or like 2 years ago. Like the idea of us being able to be in the same house or communicate or have interactions just was fathomable. And I never thought that that would be a place that I would ever be, or a place even back then that I would even want to be, because I didn't want to be in this relationship. I didn't want to be with her. I wanted everything else. I wanted to do what I want to do, all those kind of things. So like sometimes people, I guess I'd say like two things real quick. Sometimes people like look at and they're asking like, when did I figure it out? When did when did it click? And for me, I normally describe it either like I didn't have a light switch moment, but I had more of like a dimmer switch. It like slowly turned on. Or like sometimes the idea of like, it's almost like I was putting together a puzzle. And as I finally finished putting together that initial puzzle, it spelled out narcissism. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's actually what it is. But I didn't know what it was while I was going through it. And then I just want to put like a quick disclaimer period is like my relationship with my wife and like everything that's happened. Like I want to just caution people because sometimes people like look and hear like a self-aware narcissist and the first thing they think is like, maybe mine can be that way.
Yeah.
And like one of the things I just like to be able to point out is like if people have listened to my channel or if they haven't listened to my channel, like the thing that I normally say is unless you're with someone that's willing to be honest, vulnerable, and show that consistent change, then you need to leave, whether a narcissist or not. And the only reason my wife came back was because those three criteria were being met, whereas before they never were. So like if someone's thinking like maybe this will work out, or maybe I should stick with my narcissist, maybe I should give them, a 30th try to see if this will actually work out. Like they just need to understand like those three things, like honesty, vulnerability, and consistent change need to be there, or else you're holding on to a pipe dream a lot of times.
Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I was thinking about that when you were talking that, because that's something that I get worried about with clients too, thinking, oh, well, my narcissist will change. And it's like the amount of work that, you did a beautiful job explaining how much work that, this has been, but I think it's probably also double helpful to hear it come from you to say that unless those things are happening, there's not true change. And if a narcissist tells you that they're changing without those things, they're also not changing. I've definitely had a relationship where like he kept claiming he changed and I'd be like, well, what did you do? He's like, well, I read this book. And I was like, oh, okay.
Right.
Like what? like, great. That has done nothing, right? You haven't gone to therapy. I don't hear any change in action. You're telling me that you can change, like you can change by yourself. So you can get you out of whatever you're in. It's like, we hear a lot of that and it could be ridiculous.
Right. Or like the idea of like going to therapy once or 5 times or something like that has them magically like healed or fixed.
It's like, I'm done.
I mean, that's something I would joke about too. Even when we'd done couples therapy in the past, like not even like the recent stuff, but like years ago, we go and be like, oh, okay, like I'm all fixed, just trying to like get that idea and impression of like, oh, it's all better. It's not that big a deal when it absolutely was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was in couples therapy with somebody once and he went 3 times and he was like, I decided I don't like it. And I was like, well, what about it you don't like? He was like, it's just not going anywhere. And I was like, it's been 3 sessions. Like we barely know like each other's names right now. Like chill.
Right.
But I actually at that point took it as a sign. So I want to dive into some of the parts of narcissistic abuse because I've watched your videos, I've listened to you talk. I do send my clients over to your channel to clarify things, but I want to go over different parts of like how the narcissist treats their, I hate the word supply, but the supply to try and understand, I guess, what is going on for the narcissist, because I think a lot of people don't understand that it's not personal to them, even though it feels so personal.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I mean, a lot of times people think of it in like 2 different ways. A lot of times people think that it's about them when it actually isn't, and about them being about the survivor, about the victim, about the person that's being abused. And I don't say that lightly to try to be like, oh, it's not about you. But I try to say that to try to give the perspective that when you're in a narcissistic relationship, the narcissistic relationship is all one-sided, and that one side does not include you. And a lot of times people think that it does. And that's not to be like, oh, you don't matter. No, that means that how that person is treating you is they don't value you. And that's hard. That's one of the hard truths for a lot of people to understand and get to the place of understanding, is that the narcissist doesn't care about you. They care about themselves. They care about their image. They care about their money or how they look to society, but they don't really care about you as a person, which comes out in how they demonstrate that on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes I'll give the illustration of, imagine that you and I are standing in the middle of a road and you're standing behind me. And as I look down the road, I can see a car that's coming at us, I don't know, about like 60 miles an hour. And as that car gets closer and closer and closer, I can start to see on the front bumper of that car, it says guilt and shame.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing as that car is going to get closer, it's going to impact me and it's going to hold me accountable for standing in the middle of the road. It's going to hold me accountable for my actions. And so because I don't want to deal with that accountability, that responsibility, because that impact seems like it's too hard, means I'm going to jump out of the way. And when I jump out of the way to save my own skin, that car ends up running over you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the concept there is, there's a lot of times with narcissism that it's not even about the other person. It's just about them saving their own skin. And as a result, they're damaging other people. Now, I say that tongue in cheek because I don't want people to be like, oh, but they do know and they do attack. Yes, absolutely. But there is less of that sometimes than what people want to imagine or people want to see. Sometimes people want to say like, well, they're attacking me on purpose because of how they're feeling in the moment, or because they're unwilling to actually give that away, of like, no, it's actually, they're just so consumed with themselves that they don't care how they run over you in the process of doing the things that they want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned shame before, and we know that like that's one of the things, or one of the main things a narcissist is trying so hard not to feel. And when you mentioned shame, when we were going over your story and reading Brene Brown, I actually wondered if at that time, when you read about how she was talking about shame and vulnerability, like if you remember what your reaction was to that. Were you like, what, this doesn't make any sense? Was it like, oh, wait, maybe I have this? Like, is a narcissist aware that they're running away from shame, or do they think that they just like it's uncomfortable and they move on? Is it more surface level than that?
So it's the aspect of it being like uncomfortable and moving on. So like it's the idea of running away from it, or like jumping out of the way of the car, or like sometimes I'll give the idea of like guilt and shame of almost being like you are boiling spaghetti on the stove and you accidentally slip your hand into the boiling hot water. You're going to jerk your hand out because it hurts. That's a lot of times how like a narcissist is viewing or approaching the concept of guilt, and the concept of shame is like, I just have to get away from it as fast as possible. So there's less of a moment of like identifying what it is, and more just a moment of like, okay, I don't like that, I'm out. Like I'm gone. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to avoid or to get away from it. So when I read the book and when I got to the place where I was like reading through like the shame piece and like understanding, there's piece of that I was like, yeah, like that's me. Like I resonated with it. Didn't connect with anything else. Like didn't see the whole section. Like I remember in the book, she says there's like a quote of, you can't like swing a cat without hitting a narcissist or something like that she does from like a TEDx stage or whatever. And I remember that. Like I was going through and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. But there was like a new enlightenment of going back through once being self-aware. And I was like, oh, she's talking about narcissism. Where before I'd read it and it was almost, I guess you could almost say like it almost felt like blind to it. And it felt like I connected with the shame piece, but that was like the only thing in the whole book that I actually like connected with. I was just like, oh yeah, I have shame and it's like bigger in my life than what I want to acknowledge or what I want to admit, and then kind of move on from there.
How would you define shame now that you're aware and being able to see it and have a relationship to it? How do you think you deal with shame now in a healthier way?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So a couple of things that kind of go with that. I think the first thing that I think of is actually some conversations that I had with my therapist like 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago now, because I was getting into this like funk with particular project that I was working on, and I needed to learn this certain program and I couldn't figure it out, and it was just frustrating me. And so there's this piece of like shame that was coming out of like, I can't figure this out. I'm too dumb. Okay, well, I'm just not going to do it. It just doesn't matter. And I realized, and we actually went through in the therapy session, I brought it up, we talked about it. We actually stepped into some of the IFS model, the internal family systems, and started walking through some of it. And there was a piece of me that started to identify what shame was in those moments, because shame in those moments for me, and this is all like recent, like in the past month, like shame in that particular moment for me was along the lines of something that was there to put me down, to make me feel stupid, to make me feel bad, to make me feel like the idiot, like all this kind of stuff. And like we paused for a moment and she was like, what if shame is actually on your side? What if it wants the best for you? What if it wants the good for you? And I was like, well, like I've never thought about that. And so like we go through this whole like IFS system, like talking to the different like parts and things like that. And got to the place where I realized that in that particular moment with that particular situation, that's the easiest illustration right now, was along the lines that like shame wasn't trying to put me down. It was actually trying to expose the area that I need to work on more. And the majority of the time, like shame is always something that I'm running from or thinking like this is the worst thing ever. But in reality, when I was able to, like in that illustration, when I was able to start shifting that dynamic of like, wait a second, it's actually showing me, it's giving me an opportunity of this is where I need to learn. This is what I need to dive into. But before, the concept was no, like I'm not good enough. I can't figure it out. I'm stupid. Let me just run away from it. So like a completely different dynamic that is shifted then. It shifted before in different ways, but that was like a very unusual shift that happened even in like the past like month.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. It's like the shame's there to point you in the direction that you need to go. It's not there to show you what you need to run away from.
And for me, it was kind of getting to the place where I had to hit like a brick wall. And so, like with that illustration, it was like I had to figure out this certain program. I couldn't figure out this certain program. And what she kind of like pulled out, my therapist, it was like when we were going through the IFS, it was like my ego. And so, like, my ego had been running so hard and so fast with different programs, different things that I was working on, been running so hard and so fast, it could just blow through all of these little walls, these little barriers, little challenges, like could blow through like not knowing something because I could figure it out really fast, all this kind of stuff. And then it runs into this like brick wall that it can't get through. And then that's when shame walks up as like, see, you can't do it. And I'm looking at that being like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst person ever. My ego's hurt, all that kind of stuff. And it's more like shame's like, no, you can't do it because you need to learn how to traverse the wall this way or whatever it might be. Just that piece was like a different kind of like light bulb moment just over the past month of understanding the piece of shame that I always want to look as being like attacking and hurting me when sometimes it actually could be trying to help because it's just trying to expose things that I need to work on.
Yeah. And I appreciate you kind of talking through what it looks like now, even though it's a recent realization and what it would look like in the past and I guess the way that you've looked at it when you weren't as aware as you are now. Because I think a lot of people that are on the other side of the narcissist feel like, and I'm sure you hear this often, is that they feel like they just don't exist. They feel like they just don't exist to the other person, that their feelings don't matter, that their thoughts don't matter, that their life is being like ruined and that the other person just doesn't care. And it sounds like that's in that moment, it's like all they're able to see is themselves. They're not aware that this is something they should actually, like you said, like lean into it and like care about it, right? They're so separate from that.
Right.
So when that's happening, so that would, I guess, be like the discard when the narcissist is just really showing a lack of care to another person, lack of empathy or any empathy, probably towards the end of a relationship. And they pretend or act like they didn't even exist. What is going on for the narcissist there? Is it a shame spiral of some kind, or is there something else going on there?
So like with the discard side, like there's a lot of different pieces that could be, and it kind of varies depending on the narcissist or depending on the type of narcissist kind of a thing. Sometimes it's this aspect of boredom of I'm bored with this supply. I'm bored with this appliance, this transaction. So I'm going to go do what I want to do. Like that's where you see a lot of like cheating or like leaving or ghosting or stuff like that. Or there's this aspect of sometimes there's this imbalance. So a narcissist might, let's say, for instance, a narcissist might get with someone who has a lot of money or is really driven in business. And the thought process is like, oh, if I get with this person, then I'm going to have a lot of money. I'm going to be driven in business. I'm going to look this good. And then they get with that person, they realize like, oh, it doesn't transfer that way. Like it's not osmosis, And so then they're like, well, now I got to cut that person down so I feel better about myself. And then maybe that's not working. And it's like, okay, well, I'm out of here because like this person obviously doesn't. And they'll twist the story. So there's like a lot of different variations on like the discard piece. Now, a lot of the discard piece is just along the lines of my needs aren't getting met, or I don't get what I want, or I'm not able to control the person how I want. But then it has to switch pretty quick because I can't just walk out and be like, oh, I left you because my needs weren't getting met. Like that's only going to fly in so many circles. And then people are going to be like, okay, but you were also a jerk. Like there's all these like pieces here. So then the story has to get changed really quick because how it would appear in society or how it would appear to friends or family would bring about that shame, would bring about some of that guilt. So then, well, no, I was just the victim. Like, she didn't treat me nice. She was abusive to me. Like, all this stuff also has to switch really quick so that they avoid the accountability and the responsibility of who they actually showed up as inside the relationship.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads directly into one of the questions that I had from I think this one came in through Instagram around the lies.
Mhm.
And I think it directly creates that story that they're trying to create. So to summarize, she wrote in saying that the narcissist or her former narcissist would lie constantly to her about everything. So it could be about little things, big things, but also cheating and things like that. And never, never actually owned up to it to anybody. And
Mhm.
so she knew the truth and she had to come into terms with the truth, but she lost everybody in her life, any mutual friends that they had, because he refused to tell them the truth and just
Mhm.
sort of moved on. And then she felt like it doesn't make sense how somebody can do this. And
Mhm.
it does, like through the lens of a narcissist.
Right.
And so, why does a narcissist lie about all of those things? Is it all just to protect their image, the way they see themselves and the outer appearance? Do they start to really believe those lies to be true?
So with that question, I would say the quick answer would be both. So how I phrased it before is sometimes the first victim of gaslighting in a narcissistic relationship is the narcissist. And I don't mean that to be like, what was the narcissist? But I mean, like, when a narcissist lies, there also has to be this piece that starts to believe the lies. And you tell a lie over and over for years, you'll believe it, no matter what it is. And a lot of times that lie will end up not even appearing or looking like a lie. It just looks like a fact. And then the narcissist is like, no, that is true. Like, I am faithful. Yeah, I've cheated like 300 times, but I am faithful. Like, that's like literally how ingrained the lie can be, because they have to justify what they're doing. They have to justify how they're showing up or their lack of showing up, either way. And so, like, when we're talking about lies and like how that works with the narcissism, there's this aspect of lying and gaslighting themselves. And there's also this aspect of lying and it becoming habitual and it becoming intentional. And sometimes it's both. So sometimes it becomes such a habit that a narcissist will lie just about anything. Sometimes they're really good at it, sometimes they're awful at it, but it's like habit, like it just happens, you know? And then there's this piece of it being like intentional. And a lot of times I feel like it's both. Of like, there be something that, oh, like, did you do this? And okay, so let's try to make it really real. Okay, Kayla asks like, hey, did you take out the trash? Okay. In my mind, I'm
Mhm.
like, I know she asked me to take out the trash like 2 days ago, whatever it might be. Okay. And I'm like, crap, like, I didn't take out the trash. That's a bad thing. I should have done that. I told her I was going to do that, et cetera, et cetera. That triggers the guilt and the shame. Okay. The guilt and the shame because I didn't show up and I didn't demonstrate that I cared or that I actually was responsible, anything like that. So this is guilt and shame. And so the immediate response to avoid the guilt and the shame in that moment is, yeah, I took out the trash. Like, it's an immediate lie. Like, I have to be able to avoid it and not come to terms with that I messed up, that I didn't do what I said I was going to do, that I was incongruent with what I said versus what I actually did. And so then that happens. And then there's like the intentionality behind it. And she's like, well, why is the trash can full? Now I know that I've lied. I see the issue there. And then I still have to follow it up because then there's still guilt and shame running after me. So like, think
Mhm.
of it like if I then turn around and be like, actually, no, I didn't. That's even bigger guilt and shame because then I have to actually admit that I didn't show up how I was supposed to be. And I also lied about it. And so it's just like it perpetuates it. And so then it's more intentional of like, well, yeah, I took it out, but I had to throw some stuff away. So that's why it's already full again. So like then it becomes this like intentionality of, okay, I have to do this in order to protect the image that I'm putting out there. So ultimately, when we talk about like the mask that a narcissist uses, it ends up being this double-edged sword that's very cyclical in nature. Like, it doesn't really stop. And until there's this extreme honesty piece that comes from inside them versus even for another person, it won't stop because my mask is I'm a good person. But then I know I'm not a good person because I didn't fulfill my responsibility. But then I have to do whatever I can, lie, cheat, steal to get back to the place where at least my image knows that I'm a good person. Other people know I'm a good person and I'm able to continue to manipulate. So it's kind of like there's always this like push and pull back and forth of trying to get to the place of, hey, I'm a good person. Okay, I know I'm not, but I have to convince myself. I have to do whatever I need to do to convince others that I'm a good person. And then I'm a good person when it's not true.
That was such an amazing description of what is happening there, because it's like, I think that a lot of people see that. They see, and I mean, that's what probably drives them crazy, right? It's like there's
Hmm.
somebody who's like on the other side and they're like, but you're not doing any of the things that you're claiming you do. I know you didn't do it, right? It's like, I know you
Right.
didn't take out the trash. And then they're like, no, I did. And when this happens, it can be so disorienting. You touched
Hmm.
on gaslighting and that, and obviously all of that was gaslighting. You're gaslighting about the
Hmm.
trash, but struggling to word this question, and I was even struggling to word it when I was writing it down, but it's directly related to this. So I want to try and ask it. But
Okay.
as, and this actually came from my experience. I was with somebody and he would constantly gaslight me for what I thought. So it would be this like and this happens across the board, but it would be like, I would say, no, I feel fine. I'm not tired. And he'd be like, you're tired. I'd be like, no, I'm not tired. Like, he'd be like, well, you look
Hmm.
tired. I'm like, I'm not tired. And then it would turn into a fight over how I feel. Or even just like, I want to do this by myself today. I'm totally fine. We can connect later. No, no, you don't. And so I hear it often. I've definitely experienced it where like I will have a thought, or a person will have a thought, a belief. They will know who they are and they know what they think. And like we're living in our own heads. And the narcissist trying to gaslight what we feel.
Hmm.
And it can be so disorienting, because then you start to like ask yourself, like, wait, do I look tired? Am I tired? Should I be
Right.
tired? It's a hard thing to understand, but it sounds like, based on what you just said before about kind of that cycle of the mask, I imagine they do that because they're trying to mask how they actually feel. Is that what's going on?
That would be a part of it, because a lot of what you described was like the likelihood of gaslighting, but also just emotional manipulation, and sometimes it's projection. So the projecting of like, I'm tired, so I'm going to project it onto you, and once you take it, then I'm like, oh, I'm not tired anymore. Like I'm grumpy, so let me put it on you. Then if you're grumpy, then I don't have to be grumpy. It's like literally like the transfer of emotions to the other person. And then there's also this aspect that sometimes it's even more so a malicious way to either cause a fight or to be able to produce a separation or a disconnect so that they can go do what they want to do. So, like, hey, you're really grumpy. Like, oh, no, I'm not grumpy. And it turns into an argument. And they'll be like, well, I just can't deal with you being grumpy anymore. And so I'm going to leave. So I'm going to go leave and I'm going to go do what I wanted to do to start off with. But I didn't want to feel bad doing that, just like, leaving you alone and doing that and making you feel bad. Instead, like, I had to have a reason. So I created a reason. So this is all like emotional manipulation. So I created a reason to have a disconnect so that I could go do what I wanted to do to start off with, and then I feel justified in doing it because you made this awful scenario. Like it's very like twisting it back around. And with some of this, we also touch into even like grooming and different pieces like that, where the person is trying to project it onto you, but then they're also trying to manipulate how you feel and how you're interacting, to the place that then they become the person that's like the teacher, or the person that is like putting you down, or being like, okay, like, I know you're grumpy, so I'm just going to leave you alone, but like, we'll talk about this later. Or like, maybe we can figure this out. Or like, maybe we need to get to counseling because of the fact that like you're always in the mood. Like, I just can't deal with this. Like that kind of a thing, where it's then this condescending piece trying to put you in your place and trying to train you of how you're supposed to act.
And then what happens when somebody fights back to that? Like if say somebody is just like, they're not fully accepting it. They're not like, oh, this is me. I guess I need to just do this. But they're like, no, what's wrong with you? Like, what do you do? Like,
Mhm.
then
So,
does the narcissist, I guess, does a narcissist increase like the emotional manipulation, or is that typically when they would discard that person?
So that can be narcissistic specific. And so that's
Got it.
why, so with part of that, we'd be talking about like even like gray rocking sometimes. We'll kind of touch on that. And like, I normally caution people that I think personally, gray rocking only works 50% of the time. And that might be a high percentage, because sometimes it will help and then they'll just disengage and be like, whatever, and just leave. Or sometimes it'll just accelerate it. And typically what's happening is, I talk about sometimes with clients, is this going through like a cycle piece where the narcissist is triggered and they hit onto guilt, and then that triggers the shame. And then after that, it brings them to the blame. And that's where they're trying to blame, project, put it on you. And sometimes you have both sides, like you're asking here, like either the person accepts the blame or they don't accept the blame. Either way, it's typically going to still leave the narcissist spiraling out into typically rage after that. And
Mhm.
then typically into almost like a depression piece. Now, you don't always see the depression very long because then they'll gaslight, love bomb, and future fake back up to the surface of like, okay, everything's normal. We can just sweep it under the rug, ignore it. Life goes back to the way it was. But a lot of times, what you'll see is after the projection, putting that on you, the blame piece doesn't work. Then a lot of times that's where you'll have the rage, either overt or either covert, because they're not getting their way. They're not getting you to be submissive to their control.
Got it. Yeah. And with the projection and the blame, like people obviously, and we said this a few times, like feel like they are crazy, but more so that they might be the abusive one, or they might be
Hmm.
the narcissist. They might be the one making everything up. And
Hmm.
so, what do you recommend for somebody who does feel like they're experiencing all of this and it just feels so dizzying and like they are crazy or that they might actually be the narcissist? How can they begin to unravel some of that and really see I'm not the narcissist. I'm not crazy. And this is actually
Right.
what's happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think first off is like getting in touch with people that understand it, whether that's a coach, a therapist, a counselor, anything like that, that understand it. And then you can actually talk through it and be like, wait a second, like this is what's happening. Like I feel crazy. Just be able to get another perspective. Sometimes either before or after doing that, like also starting to journal, starting to actually write down, like, this is what's actually happening in the relationship. It's amazing sometimes when you start recording your truth by writing it down, by journaling it, that you start to see and like pull different nuances out of it that you're like, yeah, I've been really abusive. And then you write stuff down about how like the other partner was like yelling and raging and throwing and breaking stuff. And you're like, wait a second, like that doesn't have me being abusive. That has them being abusive. I was just responding in X, Y, and Z. Like there's a lot of different pieces. And that touches on to reactive abuse, where a narcissist is pushing someone's buttons to a place where they finally snap. And then the narcissist calms down and is like, wait a second. It's like, see, you're the abusive one. Like all of that is like a ploy and a plan. So whenever someone's like asking, like, am I the narcissist? Like that's a great time to be able to start diving into journaling, to working with the coach, to like start getting to the place of understanding, like, wait a second, like what are the toxic traits that I'm seeing? And are they stuff that I've always had, like throughout my whole life, that I've had in every relationship? Is it stuff that's only in this relationship? How is it showing up now versus before? And start identifying some of those pieces and where they stem from. Because whether it's think of it this way, whether it's a toxic or a positive trait, everything is going to stem from different triggers that we have in our lives. And a trigger is what's going to develop someone into a trauma bond or keep them in a trauma bond and lock them into the story that they believe. So typically, like when we're diving into flushing that out and figuring that out, we're getting with someone who understands, we're journaling, we're starting to actually get underneath the surface and figure out what's the trigger event, what's the thing that happened that actually caused this, that actually moved us into this thought process or moved us into this crazy making experience. And then what is actually the truth? What are the facts of the situation that we can bring into play to understand who we are and what's actually true?
Yeah. Yeah. That actually reminded me of something that I did when I was beginning to heal. And it was, I would write out like what they were claiming I did, like almost like a screenplay, and then like what I did, what they were projecting
Yeah.
onto me, and then what the truth was. And I would do it just on like two sides of a paper. My journal was just filled with these conversations of like, he said like I'm being distant and I'm cold and I'm pushing him away. And it's like, well, we had 15 conversations that went poorly. So I'm just
Mm.
trying to collect myself, and he's not respecting, like he's expecting the same level of affection and love that he had at the beginning of the relationship. Or like, you did this,
Right.
you're tired. I wasn't tired, you
Hmm.
know, and that really helped me just say, like, just really be able to unravel, like, this is actually what's going on. Like
Yeah.
I'm not these things. I know that I'm not. And I tell clients that the first step is getting right with the reality of what's actually happening. And
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a good way
yeah,
to put it.
this was a question that came in, and we've touched on so many aspects of narcissistic abuse, but we haven't really touched on triangulation. And I
Mhm.
was wondering if you could just define what triangulation is or how you see it and how it comes up in these relationships.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's like a couple different pieces to it. With triangulation, I guess I would group it initially into being like two different types. And one would be like direct interaction and one would be like indirect interaction. And so, like, an indirect interaction of triangulation would be me pitting you against someone else without you even meeting them, interacting with them. I'm triangulating the conversations, the interactions, anything like that to get to the place where you start to believe a certain thing. Now, typically that's for my own gain or my own like pleasure, whatever it might be, but it's typically trying to pit one person against the other. When you have it in like the direct kind of function, a lot of times you'll see that as them bringing like a third party into conversations, interactions, and arguments of like, let me bring this person into, kind of show you like, oh, like this third party is going to tell us what's going on. Well, you're actually being abusive to me. Like, it gets all twisted around kind of thing. And with triangulation, it's normally along the lines of trying to bring, for the narcissist, trying to bring someone either on their side or in their camp that can confuse the other person as well, kind of like a flying monkey, kind of like someone who can manipulate by proxy. Or it's along the lines of not just trying to bring them into that space, but trying to pit them like against each other to be able to get more out of either one or both. And you see this sometimes with cheating relationships and multiple different aspects of it. Is sometimes I've described it before as like trying to like up the ante, like trying to, if we do like so you go out with one person and you're like, well, this person held my hand. And you say that to the next person of like, well, they held my hand. And the person's like, okay, well, I'm going to kiss you. Like, and it's like, okay, this person kissed me. Well, I'm going to do this. And like, so it's just like moving up and up. Now that's like a childish example, but that does happen to different degrees in the relationships where someone is going to bring in something to try to make someone else feel put down or feel like, oh, I need to work harder. This could even be like a guy talking about like his affair, or someone at work that's quote unquote not an affair, but like he's telling this other person like, she's so great, she does this, or like even walking down the road of like, oh my gosh, like she looks great. And then everything that's going to play in the other person's mind is like, well, what about me? Well, why can't I get acknowledged that way? Like, what's going on? And then you have like the other side with like it being brought into like arguments or things like that of like, well, let's bring my best friend into it because they would actually understand what's going on. And then they take the narcissist side because the narcissist has already predisposed them and pre-trained them of how you're going to respond in a negative way.
And I could just see, like, as you were talking through that, how that can absolutely show up in therapeutic environment too, or in couples therapy, where they triangulate with the therapist.
Absolutely. And that's why a lot of times I will say, like, don't go to therapy, don't go to couples counseling, anything like that with a narcissist. Like, definitely, like I'm a Christian, but I definitely am pretty adamant on like, don't go to Christian counseling, like couples counseling with a narcissist, because it's going to be awful. And typically it's because they don't have a clue of what they're talking about, not from a biblical standpoint, but from a narcissistic abuse and like a mental standpoint of what they're dealing with. And typically they play right into the narcissist's hands of like, see, you're supposed to love and respect me, even if I'm abusing you. Like, all this kind of stuff gets really skewed up in Christian counseling. And it also gets screwed up just in regular couples therapy, couples counseling, whatever you want to call it, because they're only seeing, like, that's the thing is like they walk into the room and the survivor is like, wait a second, who's this? Like, I drove here with my abusive husband, and now the person that walks in is like the Disneyland dad, the knight in shining armor. Like, they seem perfect. And that's because they switch the mask based on the person that they're interacting with.
That's so interesting. I wasn't sure if you were going to recommend not going to couples therapy with a narcissist, but it's definitely been recommended before. And I see it all over, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, other resources of just don't, because it's not going to help. Like, get yourself into therapy, prioritize getting yourself into therapy to understand what's going on and not focusing as much on changing them or changing the dynamic.
Right. Yeah, because that's not your job responsibility. Or if that person does change for you, it doesn't mean it's going to actually happen. Typically, it's going to be short-lived if they're changing for another person. Right. And so, like, think of it this way, there should never be the consideration of going to couples therapy if the other person has not already been in therapy for an extended period of time, and that the other person is not showing they would have to also be showing honesty, vulnerability, and consistent change. And you'd have to see that over a period of time. So like, until all those criteria were met, then it should never even be a possibility of even going to a couples counselor or therapy together with a toxic person like that.
I think that is such an amazing point. And thank you for saying that so clearly, that unless that person is truly working on themselves, and that you can see it and it's been going on for a while, and that there is actual change that you're seeing based on that, then there's couples therapy is off the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate all of your time today. This was amazing. And I think that you touched on so many important points. I would love if you could share how people can find you and what resources that you have out there right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, easiest way to be able to find me on all platforms everywhere is just to type in RAW motivations, and you can find us on all the platforms. So we're on, I think it's like 7 different ones: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest. I don't know. There's several others out there. So like we're on all the platforms under Raw Motivations. We've got a podcast that you can listen to, videos that you can watch. If you want to get like an overall idea of some of the stuff that we offer, you can go to rawmotivations.com. Specifically, I work with people one-on-one in like a coaching environment to answer questions, to be able to give them clarity, and then also to be able to work with them in a coaching environment to help them step forward in their healing journey. Because we do believe it's a healing journey. It's not a quick fix, and it's not something that's going to get to the place. You're not going to go back to the person you used to be because that person no longer exists. But the goal is that we continue to grow and change and develop to be the person that you were meant to be, called to be, or that you want to be coming out of that abusive relationship. So a lot of how I partner with people is helping them break the trauma bond, get through the rumination, and be able to learn how to set up good, healthy boundaries so they either don't go back to the toxic person or they don't get involved with the toxic person down the road. And so with that, it's this mindset of like, we're going to walk you into this healing journey and then have that transition into a growth mindset. And then as we continue to see people learn how to rewire their mindset, how to break the trauma bond, we see this massive like J curve up of just like this massive growth that we're seeing a lot of people get free and get clear about who they are, about what's going on. And so we do have a couple programs as well. And I just will highlight 2 of them real quick since we're running out of time. But one of those is the NARC app. And that's NARCAPP, narcapp.com, stands for Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Community. And the big focus there is a community of like-minded people that have been through the same stuff that you've been through, that you can interact with, you can touch base with, that you can like learn from, or that you can just ask advice or support or encouragement. That's been huge. We have like a Monday night weekly connect that people meet every single Monday night to be able to help each other, but to be able to learn from other people as well. We bring in coaches, therapists, survivors from all across the globe on Monday nights once a month. And then we also have like teaching every Monday night as well. So there's a lot of different pieces there, but the community aspect is huge. And the second thing that I'll announce, just because it's brand new, just released as like a soft launch recently. So we're running some soft launch pricing and sales just as we start to advertise it, is our Escape Toxicity. It's a 7-day challenge to healing. And it starts to touch base on just like the initial stuff of the hard truths that you need to work through about like, do they care? Do they actually love you? Like how to set boundaries, like what that trauma bond actually looks like. Are you the narcissist? Those questions are ones that we answer inside that 7-day challenge. And people can access that at escapetoxicity.com and be able to check that out and see if that'd be something that would help in your healing in that process. Either way, would love to be able to work with anybody if anybody ever wants to. Easiest way to just go to rawmotivations.com, and you can follow us on any of the platforms under Raw Motivations.
Awesome. And I will put all your links in the show notes so that people can easily find them and connect with you. You
Awesome.
also have a podcast, right?
Yes, actually, we actually have 2 right now. We do have one podcast that's just under Raw Motivations, and that's pretty much all it is. But we do have a second podcast that my wife and I launched last year, and we released 10 episodes on our first season that happened in 2022, and that's called Trauma, Drama, and Life. Currently, we're releasing season 2 as well, so we've got the first couple episodes out, and we're planning on doing 1 a week for the year of 2023.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.